Hello again, class, and welcome to Lesson 8. We're going to very much follow up with what we covered last time in Lesson 7. So here we're going to be getting to pseudo-archaeology. The illustration gives it away. We're going to be looking more at those aliens, aren't we? First, let's get to the lost continents idea because that plays into pseudo-archaeology quite often. Lost continents, you know what we're going to be getting to, don't you? Let's start off with the idea that there are lost lands. There are bunches of them. Plate tectonics theory comes out of the late 60s, first proposed as continental drift about 1912. The idea is that the Earth's crust is broken up into distinct tectonic plates. They move on the asthenosphere. This gives us earthquakes, volcanoes, you can see mountains. So long and the short of it, there are a lot of continents that have existed throughout the history of the Earth that are no longer with us. The continents that we do have change their configuration. Sometimes they break apart, sometimes they join together. There are lots of lost lands, just the vast majority of them from before humans existed on this planet. So perhaps the most famous that some of you are familiar with, Pangaea, all land or all Earth. Most recent supercontinent in our history, but there have been others. So from about 335 million years BCE to 175,000 or 175 million years BCE, long time ago. Surrounded by the, Penthalasia Sea, the all-ocean sea. The earliest identified supercontinent may be Valbara. If it did exist, you can see it goes back 3.6 billion BCE. Periodically, it's just the way that the continents or the plates move. Every so often, the continents come together, form a giant landmass, break apart, come together, break apart. It's just sort of a cycle, although not exactly a predictable one that happens on a regular basis. So our most famous lost continent, Atlantis, not at all related to plate tectonic theory. First mentioned by Plato, two works, Timaeus and Critias. And it pops up every so often. Thomas More in Utopia mentions it. Atlantis is not a huge concern. People know of it and it shows up in the literature a little bit. No one really bothers much. Well, the discovery of the Mayan civilization seems to really spark the search for Atlantis, mainly because there is this attempt to find where the Maya came from. Once again, we're in the realm of the insulting. The Indians could not possibly have created Mayan civilization, certainly not the Maya Indians who are like right there. So the Mayans had to come from somewhere else, and that's going to spark the search for a different landmass. Now, Plato is not behind this. He writes it to Timaeus and Critias. One's actually unfinished, to be perfectly honest. You can see about 360 BCE. In the Timaeus, quite honestly, Atlantis is kind of an afterthought. It's in the prologue, and it's only there as sort of an opening illustration. Then we move on to other things. We're really looking at the idea of the ideal state. As you can see in the dialogues, ancient Athens was an ideal state, waged war against Atlantis. And he claims this information comes from Egypt. So it's a tale of ancient Athens being virtuous, ancient Atlantis, not so much so. The Atlanteans allow their base natures to dominate their divine natures. It's Plato trying to tell you that you should be much more of a thinker than a doer. It's not even fleshed out, as you can see. The Critias ends abruptly. That's the beginning. It's really just sort of a morality tale. Well, of course, things start small and go big. Ignatius Donnelly is the man who gives us really the modern construct of Atlantis. His book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, 1882, you can see he situates it in the Atlantic, says that the population colonizes all around. So he tries to claim that almost every ancient civilization known in his time came from Atlantis. He says the Garden of Eden is a memory of Atlantis, origin of written language. Donnelly is, he does give us the modern construct of Atlantis, and pretty much everything modern follows Donnelly's ideas. But you get the idea. Diffusionism, the idea of an ancient area where all the culture comes out of, is certainly not from the people who are living there. And we get the Bimini Road, discovered in 1968 off North Bimini Island in the Bahamas. Why do we care? Well, supposedly it was predicted in 1938 by Edgar Cayce. The entity possessing him said that parts of Atlantis would surface in 68 or 69. Now, the reading really seems to indicate temples will come to light. This isn't a temple. It is a sort of a structure, you can see, about half a mile. It seems to be cut stone. Now, geologists have gone there and investigated because this is worth investigating. They think it's beach rock. They think that it's just joins in the beach rock have broken due to the action of water, and it's the illusion of a worked stone road. Now, true believers in Atlantis disagree and believe this is part of a giant road network that was joining Atlantean cities, islands, whatever. Other lost lands, Thule, Hyperborea. All right, so Greek travelers talk of islands in the Arctic with these names. We think they may be referring to Iceland. The idea is this is the northernmost land. Well, fine and dandy. Right away, that's not a particular problem. The problem comes in by 1900, as you can see, the far right in Germany, occultists, and the far right in Germany does tend to an occult bent, claim this is the home of the original Nordic/Aryan race, that is, white people. So white people basically came from the far north in their original form, their original Aryan form, before they were denigrated, degraded, reduced to what they are today, a mixture of white and other. And of course, ancient astronauts proponents love this. They say that this is the landing site of the large white aliens that colonized Earth. Don't you love how this white thing just keeps popping up? Lemuria. This is a little more an attempt to explain plate tectonics before we had plate tectonics. 1864. Already noticed that there are species in India and Madagascar that are very similar, but no way that the two could get between these land masses. So that's Lemuria, named after lemurs. Supposedly joins Madagascar to India, maybe Australia. Well, we don't need Lemuria, and this hypothesis, which was a fair one for the time, dissolves. It's gone. Except for Tamil nationalists in India. As you can see, today they call it Kumari Kandam and suggest this may be the homeland of the Tamil people. They've got their own thing going on. And the land of Mu, proposed, you can see, to explain supposed commonalities between Egypt and Maya. Again, we're doing the pyramid thing. Supposedly Queen Mu left Mu to found Egypt, so Egypt's founded by a Mu. Sure. Popularized by a man named Churchwood, which he tries to, again, pull all the ancient cultures together, Mayan, Vedic, Polynesian, to this one master continent in the Pacific that somehow disappeared. Like with Atlantis, like with Lemuria, there is no evidence whatsoever that Mu ever existed. But notice that these are made to explain various cultures around the world so that you don't have to credit their indigenous peoples. Now, we do have real lost continents. We mentioned that. Just a few. Greater Adria, this is actually probably the most recent one. Breaks off from North America, as you can tell. Becomes buried mostly under Southern Europe. Parts of it you can find in Turin, Italy. Some of the Taurus Mountains in Turkey. So here's a lost continent for you. Bits of it can be found in Turkey and Europe. Zealandia, remains of a small continent submerged beneath the ocean. New Zealand, for the most part, is just the very highest tips of it. It's mountains. Sahul, ancient continent, partially submerged about 18,000 years ago. What we have left today is Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania. That's actually pretty recent, but this is also pretty established. This isn't just trying to explain away the Maya and the Egyptians so that we don't have to credit the people living there. This is geology talking. Okay, let's a quick look at the continents. What about the big one? Pre-contact America. Another bit of pseudo-archaeology that's really active today in America. Well, we start off with our friend Christopher Columbus. And I use the word friend loosely. As many of you know, the Phoenix area doesn't celebrate Columbus Day, but Indigenous Peoples Holocaust Day, and I think that's perfectly justified, honestly. What about Columbus? Well, he's kind of a comical figure to me. And I say comical not to disrespect the genocide that occurred in his wake, but the fact is this guy was clueless. All right, number one, we don't know much about him. You can see 5 Columbuses have been identified in history. They all disappear about the same time. Then this one guy pops out of nowhere about a year or two later, and we don't really know his background. In fact, he is dishonest about it. He tells his son he's from Genoa. His son goes to Genoa, finds out no one's ever heard of his dad, and no one's ever heard of the family. Well, Ferdinand and Isabel take a chance on him, but they don't really trust him. He's got the size of the earth all wrong. Capitulations of Santa Fe, he's going to get a lot of goodies if he discovers anything worth discovering. Title, Admiral of the Ocean Sea, Viceroy. 10% of the take. How much faith do they have in him? Well, we've all heard the stories. He gets 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. What we don't hear is that those 3 ships are basically junkers. We're not going to waste real good ships on him. We're going to give him the garbage. Well, he lands, we believe, in the Bahamas, October 1492. We don't know which island in the Bahamas, and honestly, it may not be around anymore. Much of the Bahamas are essentially sandbars. The permanent settlement, La Navidad, in Haiti. Now, this is the major reason I think Columbus is hilarious. He thinks he's in Japan or Indonesia. He keeps sending translators off the ship to talk to the indigenous Taino peoples, and he can't understand why they're not listening to his translators. After all, they're trying to speak good Mongolian, they're trying to speak good Japanese. He doesn't have anyone who speaks Hindi. Makes 4 voyages. Okay. So the 4 voyages of Columbus, one of which technically is made illegally. He's arrested at the end of one. It's just a disaster for him. Incidentally, he dies, well, broke. The name of the land, Amerigo Vespucci, from Florence. First to realize the new lands are not part of Asia. He just calls them New World or unknown land, new land. 1507, due to some strange misunderstanding, Martin Waldseemüller decides that the name Americus, after Amerigo, would work. So, okay, we're now Americans. But I suppose it could be worse. It could be Vespuccians, although Waldseemüllerans would be kind of cool. Well, of course, there are peoples here. We know that. The indigenous peoples of the Americas, called First Nations in Canada. Well, the people in Europe can't figure out where these people came from because they look in their Bibles, and their Bibles don't say anything about God created other humans in other places. They also are pretty sure Adam and Eve didn't swim to the Americas to have children. So there's, believe it or not, it's quite a debate on whether or not Indians have souls, whether they're actually human. 1537, Pope Paul III, Sublimus Dei, declares Indians have souls, and he bans enslaving Indians. Now, that doesn't stop anybody. Believe me, the conquistadors are going to continue doing what they do. But it establishes the rights of Indians in Spanish domains. And it definitively says, yes, Indians are humans. We can't explain it. Genesis doesn't tell us anything, but they're humans and they have souls, so you need to respect them. Again, we have the Indians, and then as colonists continue to pour in, they see these ancient structures. Now, with the Spanish, it's a little easier in as much as we know Hernan Cortés conquered the Aztec. We know Francisco Pizarro conquered the Inca, so we know where that stuff comes from. In North America, the settlers, the English, come across Indian ruins, some of which are 1,000 years old, and they can't explain them. They're quite convinced these cannot possibly be from the Indians. So they begin to posit whether or not Europeans, Asians, Africans came here first. The great myth is called the Mound Builder civilization. Lots of mounds are discovered, mounds left by many cultures, honestly. Now again, the Euro-Americans, the white people in North America, they know for a fact Indians aren't intelligent enough to create these because it came to them in a dream or something. So they are determined to find where the mound builder culture comes from. They know it's got to be foreign. And there's a big debate. They really separate amongst themselves on which is what. So since the 1780s, here are your proposals. Was it the Norsemen? Did the Vikings get here and do it? Okay. Did the Egyptians? After all, they see the mound, they think, ooh, little pyramid. Did the Romans, Carthaginians, the lost 12 tribes of Israel, the Chinese? Again, anybody but the Indians. The Europeans are determined. Indians are incapable of doing any of this. Well, we've seen Joseph Smith. It's worth remembering our friend. Joseph Smith enters this fray, and he says it's the lost tribes of Israel, the Nephites and the Lamanites. Battle of Cumorah in 400, the extermination of the Nephites, or an earlier colonization by the Jaredites out of the Tower of Babel. So Joseph Smith walks in, and this is why I said that his theories don't really strike people as really strange at all. When he says that the American Indians are Jews, the word he uses, no one really has a particular problem with it. They think, if anything, he simply settled an ongoing debate. Book of Mormon incorporates the mounds into its narrative. Here's a quote from Alma 49:18, the Book of Mormon. Joseph Smith was well aware of the remains of the ancient cultures of the indigenous peoples. He's fascinated by them. He wants to hear them. Whenever a grave is found, whenever a new ruin is found, he wants to be there to look at it. Now, of course, archaeology has other things to say, though. For one thing, quite a few of the mounds that Joseph Smith winds up finding are part of the Adena culture. You can see 1000 to 200 BCE, interrelated cultures, sharing burial practices, a ceremonial system, massive mound building, and a religion that has been likened to Siberian shamanism, although it's not the same thing. There are a lot of problems with equating those too closely. But it certainly does seem to have the concept of humans morphing into animals, animals morphing into people, a relationship between human and animal that is much more strictly delineated today than was at the time. But massive mound building going on. And they are indigenous peoples. After the Adena, we get the Hopewell culture. Appears to be a development of the Adena. And these are just two. You've got several others. The Fort Ancient, you've got the Mississippian. So we could point to a lot. Again, a system of exchange from Canada to the Midwest, extensive mound building. Today we can explain these ruins very well. And again, they're all indigenous peoples. This was the genius of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. Hopewell Society. Some are massive burial mounds. Other mounds we don't understand. Just some of the material that's interesting about the Hopewell Society. They seem to be bound by one religion, or at least a centrally controlled cult. That may be the glue that holds them together, because we think that they are at least 3 different groups, perhaps related, perhaps not. The upper right, that's pipe. There are animal effigy pipes found all over the Hopewell world. You start smoking things in a pipe like that, it will probably talk to you depending what you're smoking. Beautiful artifacts. Wish we understood all of them. We presume many are religious, but when they leave you no writing, you're guessing a lot. Still, indigenous peoples. Another group that we can speak to, the Mayans. Now, of course, the Spanish get in here, and this is not exactly a mystery. They know it's the Mayans. Okay, multiple independent city-states, usually at war with one another, indigenous pyramid building. This is also interesting to us because Joseph Smith learns about these peoples in the 1840s. And when he learns about the Maya, he begins to change his mind about the Nephites and the Lamanites. For about the first 10 years or so after the Book of Mormon, he was quite convinced that the Nephite-Lamanite story played out in North America, New York State, to the Rocky Mountains and whatnot. Then he learns about the Maya, and some of the images, some of the painted images of the ruins come to light in books and whatnot. And he begins to propose maybe this really was the Nephite and the Lamanite culture down in Central America. The Mayans, though, do us a great favor. The only known Amerindian people to develop writing independently. Only a few cultures worldwide develop writing independently. The Egyptians, the Chinese, for example, the Sumerians, the Maya. So this is a rare thing, and all writing comes from one of those few. But the Maya do it. They do it themselves. It's not borrowed from Atlantis. We can watch it develop. You can see describing Choctaw Maya, the language. Most likely, we think the Olmec and the Mexica borrowed this writing system and adapted it for their languages. Well, some of the things that we're looking at that have been supposedly found proving pre-contact. The Wallam Alum purports to be a record of the Delaware Lenape Nation, and you are seeing drawings from it. Supposedly tells about the creation, tells about the flood of Noah, and the migration of the Delaware Lenape through North America. It essentially incorporates the Delaware into sort of the Genesis narrative. And for many decades, it's believed to be an accurate record of the Lenape Nation. Yeah, you can see it takes a while, but by 1994, it's proven to be a hoax. Incorporating elements of Egyptian and Chinese writing. The Wallam Alum unfortunately tells us nothing about the indigenous peoples. It tells us about the Americans who want this to be true. Grave Creek Stone, 1838, mound in West Virginia. The inscription is undeciphered, so for a long time we thought very possibly this could be another indigenous writing system in North America. And, you know, a lot of scientists and historians were interested in this. Then, as you can see, we found that these exact same characters are found in a book from 1752. So we discovered this thing in 1838. The book is 1752. That's not promising. Looks like they were copied out of a book. And by 2008, again, it took a while, but it's now believed this is the hoax, that somebody used probably that exact book and decided to carve things onto this rock and pass it off as proof of something else going on in the New World. The Davenport tablets, Iowa, Lutheran minister discovers them. Well, he's a trustworthy person. He finds them. He obviously thinks they're genuine, gives them to the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian supports them for a short time, but within 20 years declares them hoaxes, that there's no way this is authentic. And today, the Davenport tablets are widely accepted as hoaxes. You can see current thinking is that they were faked to discredit the Reverend. He has some very jealous people who want to make him look bad, and they figure that having him publicly come out in favor of these fakes will make him look like an idiot. Joke's on them. He's not the one who gets blamed for this. Okay, this is my personal favorite, I admit. The Kensington Runestone. Discovered in Minnesota. Claims to be the record of a 1362 expedition by the Norse that goes badly wrong. There's a lot of reasons to dispute the authenticity of the stone. Linguistic grounds. It seems to be a mixture of dialects. The lithographic grounds. The not just the stone itself, but how the inscription is put into it. It seems to be using a modern type of chisel that wouldn't have existed at the time. But there are a lot of people who believe the Kensington Runestone is genuine, and so this is still divisive today. Either way, whether real or a hoax, it's an interesting one. Here is the translation of the text. 8 yachts and 22 Norwegians. And as you can see, they come home, find 10 men red of blood and dead. Ugh. Hail the Virgin Mary, save us from evil. The year 1362. You know, this right away can make a good movie. Whether it's true or not is irrelevant. The Los Lunas Decalogue Stone. Reported in 1933, Los Lunas, New Mexico. It's large, so it doesn't ever really get moved. It's been, unfortunately, a bit vandalized today. claims to record the Ten Commandments in Paleo-Hebrew of the Samaritan variety. That would be exciting to prove that Samaritans were in the New World in New Mexico. But as you can see, today the rock's considered a Mormon hoax. In investigating it, the dating doesn't match. Again, questions about the text on the stone, about the carving. It seems to be someone just wanting to show that the Indians are not Indians, but they're Hebrews. I'll only have given you a few things. There are a lot more we could throw in here. But this guy is a fascinating one to read, even if you don't buy his theories. Barry Fell. He does a lot of publishing on this material in the 70s. He buys it completely. I mean, he really believes that there were Europeans, mostly Europeans, in North America long before Columbus. Now, his credentials are a little funny. Professor of Invertebrate Zoology. Okay. So from being a professor, I mean, a real, serious, honest-to-God scholar in invertebrate zoology, he essentially declares himself an expert in ancient languages and goes off and writes a couple books. Claims to find evidence of Old Irish Ogham script in West Virginia. He dates to the 6th to 8th century, so he says the ancient Irish discovered the New World. Ogham is an interesting script. It's almost like scratches. I mean, honestly, the best Ogham can be a little difficult to make out. Experts in Ogham have looked at his claims, and they find it lacking pretty badly. Another man who is honestly more of an attention hound, Fell tended to stay in the background. This guy shows up on TV all the time, Graham Hancock. Alternative theories of human origins. He claims he's found the Ark of the Covenant, for example, in Ethiopia. He very much is beholden to Ignatius Donnelly. And you can see the big idea he's got, although he borrows it, actually. Antarctica is the home of human civilization, and then it goes everywhere else. So it's not that we're looking for Atlantis or Mu. Those are obviously wrong. It's Antarctica. And that's where civilization spreads to everybody else. In deep prehistory, long before writing. Pretty much with Hancock, if it's an alternative theory, he'll be the one to tell you about it. So, who discovers America? Well, first off, there was a time it was uninhabited. The Americas and the Wisconsin glaciation, 4 major ice sheets blocked any movement from land. You can see the glacial maximum, its high point, 23,000 to 19,000 BCE. When humans get here, the climate's much colder and drier in the Americas than it is today. But humans will get here. Beringia is one of the major areas. You can see Siberia and Alaska were once linked together. Lower sea levels. Later, an ice-free corridor opens through Canada. And the first peoples to get to the Midwest, as we call it, get through that ice-free corridor. These are going to be the indigenous peoples of the Americas, the American Indians, the First Nations. Not, Romans. Now, there's a site in southern Chile. It's an exciting site, Monteverde, reliably dated at 14,800 BCE, and there may be older levels. It seems that this site was settled from the sea, that the peoples get all the way to southern Chile, they set up camp by boat. Well, that kind of makes sense. If ice is blocking Canada, and we used to think that that was the end of the story. Ice blocked Canada, everyone was just waiting for the ice to melt. Monteverde says, nope, they had boat technology. Now, a particular problem with this finding, and it doesn't kill the theory by any means, the sea levels were lower at this time. So the coastline of North and South America were different. They were further out. And so any good evidence of settlement on the coast of North and South America around 15,000, 14,000 BCE would now be underwater in the Atlantic and the Pacific. Again, it's not fatal to the theory at all, but it does tell you how difficult it will be to get too much more evidence. Tracing peoples. DNA has been used to try to figure out the puzzle of the first peoples in the Americas. at least 3 major pre-Columbian migratory groups, apparently unrelated to each other for the most part. We have the Beringian population, which mostly seems to stay in the Siberia-Alaska area. Okay, they're not one of the 3 big ones. The first of the 3 big ones, the QM242 haplogroup, and we have no better name for them than this. Related to the Ket and Selkirk peoples of Siberia and the Paleo-Indians. So it's a mutation that they all seem to share, or they all share, and that seems to be the thing we can trace. Peoples of the Americas first, South America almost entirely, and we think the mutation evolved and was now western Alaska. Now look at the map at the bottom. I know it's a bit small, but the key here is the darker the color, the more heavily concentrated the QM242 haplogroup is. So you can see South America, it's almost solid. Greenland is pretty heavy. North America, it gets shaky, but it also shares territory in Siberia with the peoples there, indicating they're all related. Possible second migration and the first second are really questionable as to which order they happened in, let's be honest there. Haplogroup CP39, which sounds like a droid. Dominant Siberians, Mongolians, Oceanic peoples. Most strongly found in North America, as you can see, Athabascan, Dene-speaking peoples, Tlingit. Indicates that these related peoples may have migrated from the Russian Far East after the Paleo-Indians. So different people, almost different, definitely different ethnic groups would have been speaking probably radically different languages. It was not just one people who came into the Americas. It was multiple peoples. Perhaps the final, haplogroup R1, dominant in Eurasia, associated with resettlement, found almost exclusively in North America, Cherokee, Seminole, O'odham, Ojibwe. This, I will be honest, is controversial as anything. And this again goes back to the colonial, post-colonial narrative. White people have been claiming so much that they're dominant, that they're the original, blah, blah, blah. You can understand where others are really touchy about having any relationship with white people. So the R1 haplogroup is an extremely controversial finding. A lot of First Nations peoples reject it. Fair enough. I mean, I personally go with science, whether I like it or not. But for cultural reasons, I understand not wanting to be linked with white people. And the final migrants, Inuit, Inupiat, Yupik peoples, what we used to call Eskimo. So a lot of different peoples. And as far as the Europeans, we do know the Norse were here, the Vikings. The 10th century, they leave us the accounts in 2 sagas in particular, the Greenland saga and Eric the Red saga. They colonize Iceland. They go to Greenland, which is part of North America. They get into Canada. We think they may get into New England. So Greenland, the first part of North America, they settled in the 980s. 2 major settlements, eastern and western, creative names. There's also a middle settlement, incidentally, but it's absorbed by the western one. You can see up to a 5,000 person population. It's actually a very rich colony. They live a lot off walrus, seal. They're able to trade walrus tusks, furs. They have actually a better economy than Iceland does for something like 300 years. It is such a prosperous area that Rome sends a Catholic bishop to Greenland. Further into Canada, 3 Norse settlements at least have been found. L'Anse-aux-Meadows in Newfoundland, that was discovered in the late 60s with help from the saga, as you can see. It's been excavated, dates to about the year 1000, although maybe only for a couple of years. And to be fair, the sagas indicate this. They talk about this particular settlement was founded when the winter came early and the explorers kind of got stuck, so they had no choice but to hunker down. Now you go to Baffin Island, and by satellite, 2 more Norse settlements have been identified. They match the longhouse arrangement. I mean, they are laid out like Norse settlements, but they've not yet been excavated, at least not as of last time I checked. There's a Dorset site. Dorset are indigenous peoples, but in this other site in Baffin Island, there are a lot of Norse material, or there is a lot of Norse material indicating that this is indigenous peoples, First Nations, trading with the Norse and getting their goods. So here is your real question of the Norse being here. They talk about Vineland, area of wine. Well, they also talk about how it's nearly impossible to colonize this area because every time they try, they're beaten back by the indigenous peoples. They call them the Skrælingjar, and forgive me if my Norse is not, the greatest. Seems to mean something like the scuzzy ones. A lot of Norsemen are killed. They're not able to adequately respond. We think, again, the Dorset culture is responsible. And I think this is something that we ought to at least pause and think about. At this period, we're talking around the year 1000, the Europeans are coming in, they encounter the Indians, and technologically it's a draw. The Norse may have metal swords and they have these lovely metal shields, but the indigenous peoples of the Americas have extremely thick hide shields that are just as good, maybe lighter, and they have spears and they have bow and arrow technology, which can go straight through whatever the Norse are wearing. The indigenous peoples and the Europeans are evenly matched, and when evenly matched, the indigenous peoples beat the Europeans. Kind of turns on the head that old chestnut that the white people won against the indigenous peoples because they had guns or superior technology. There's more to it than that. Even once Columbus gets here, it's not that cut and dry. North America comes to an end. The Little Ice Age hits around 1300. North Atlantic navigation, you can see ice pack gets worse. Shortly after 1300, we start getting a couple of years without summers in Europe. The food supply begins to fail. There's actually famine going on in the first decade or so of the 1300s. So the earth is definitely getting colder, and you only need 1 degree centigrade. Humans are very, very touchy creatures. By 1350, Western settlement in Greenland abandoned. The bishops leave by 1378. Last written record we have in Greenland is from 1408, a marriage. And by 1430, the settlers have abandoned Greenland. Now, to be fair, where does that leave the Kensington Stone? Well, it mentions a date of 1362. That is within this possibility. Another reason why the Kensington Runestone is interesting is not that it gives us a date that's really outside the pale. And that date came to us when it was first discovered, about 100 years ago or more. Still, the Kensington Runestone is not at the moment reliably dated in an acceptable way. So the best you can say is maybe, but it has problems that really are difficult to get over. I think that we have covered quite a bit, enough in your minds to ask what's going on with white people. And I don't mean the standard why are white people shooting everybody, which is part of modern America. Why are white people, Europeans, Americans, so obsessed with proving they were somewhere first, with proving that they colonized certain areas, with proving that they're better than everybody else? Now, I have no good answers for you, but it's obviously something going on. Here is just a proposal. I'm not the first one to think of it, to be fair. I, however, do think there's something to it. Let's go back. The end of the Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire, depending on what you want to call it, May 1453. The Muslim Turks destroy Constantinople. Emperor Constantine XI is killed. And that's the end of this great Byzantine Orthodox Empire. What winds up happening is that Europe gets caught in a stranglehold. It is now surrounded by Islam. North Africa is Muslim. The Middle East is Muslim. The Muslims are coming in up through the Balkans. Russia is not particularly helpful. It's Eastern Christian, and it's doing its own thing. So what we have is a world where Christianity, which at one time was the major religion in, say, Central Asia, has really contracted. Islam since the 9th century has been just dealing body blows to Christianity. By about 1460, Christianity is considered to exist almost exclusively in Europe and Ethiopia. Now, of course, it exists in other places. Russia comes to mind, but Europe really finds itself isolated. It feels that it's the only one carrying the torch of Christianity. It causes Europe to turn in on itself. Christianity, Europe, whiteness all seem to get mixed together. We're going to get a time when Europe starts to turn on its own people. We get witch trials, inquisitions, the Reformation. It's a violent period in European history. But it also is a reflection of the European weakness. That is, Europe has no way of standing up against the onslaught of Islam. They're blocked, apparently on all sides. Trade with China, trade with India, something Europe would like to do, but they can't. You try to go east, you hit the Muslims, you hit the Turks, you hit the Persians, you hit the Arabs. They're going to make you pay through the nose. Even the Republic of Venice is cooperating with the Muslims. It's pretty obvious Europe is honestly much weaker than the Muslim powers. The only way that they have to get to the goods they want is to make risky trips, either the Portuguese around Africa or the Spanish going directly west to the New World. So there's a possibility that Europe is so weak that it's forced to sort of scurry around the earth to try to get what it wants. It can't stand up against Islam, and it leaves possibly a scar in the European, Euro-American mind that we're not really weak, we're really better than you somehow. And it's a possibility. I'm not going to claim that it's proven by any means, but we do have to address this weird idea that white people seem to think they're the be-all and end-all of evolution. All right, thank you, and we'll see you in the next lesson.